So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that it's you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.
The Dapper Dinosaur here with part 3 of Eating a Bit of Orange. Let's see what Sinhound has for us this time.
Let me remind you, you've got $10. You want to be a millionaire. So what do? You spend that $10 on chocolate bars, and then you sell them for more than you bought them for. That's how market works. You spend money to make money, but spending money doesn't make you money. You have to spend money to get something to sell, but you don't make money until you sell. It is the selling that makes the money. This is two different parts. So if you're going to point to genetic shuffling or genetic drift or extinction, changes in allele frequency, all of these different microevolutionary changes and go, all of those are evolution. No.
Well, those are all parts of evolution, but you're ignoring that really important part. What is it? No, it's not genetic drift. Oh yeah, it's mutations.
If you accept evolution as a fact, you are merely saying that all these other things could be happening at the same time, but they would not result in worms turning into fish or fish turning into lizards or any of the actual evolutionary changes, so it's absolutely invalid to point to those and say that those are evolution, just as it's invalid to point to these pine trees to say, well, that's part of the process that carved Mount Rushmore.
I guess it's a good thing that no one actually says that genetic recombination, extinction, and loss of genes are the entirety of evolution, because that would be stupid. And it's not.
So evolution is an unguided, natural process which increases the genetic information in an organism, creating new genes that did not previously exist.
It doesn't have to do that to be evolution, but evolution does do that, and it does it regularly in observed ways. But the other thing is, creationists always use this genetic information weasel word, without ever defining how you can tell whether or not a genome has increased in information. Are you going to give us a metric? How do you know if information has gone up or down in a genome? What do you use to measure it?
All right, I don't want to get too deeply into genetics right now.
Cannot say this. Okay, let's be honest. The reason you don't want to get too deep into genetics is because you can't, because you don't know enough about it.
But let me clarify that new genetic information does not mean an increase in the number of chromosomes, an increase in the number of genes, an increase in the number of nucleotide base pairs. What it means is that genes code for a particular structure, function, or behavior. I said structure. You know what I mean. In order to get a worm to turn into a fish, you have to add genes that it doesn't already have, because it needs to create fish parts that the worm doesn't already have, and fish behaviors that the worm doesn't already have.
See, here's where we come to a problem. Humans' ability to take things and derive meaning from them is not the same thing as information in the sense of information theory, which is the only way in which we can meaningfully measure information. So here are two pictures. This is a checkerboard pattern. You probably find some degree of meaning to this. You could play chess or checkers on it, or any host of other games. You could play tic-tac-toe on it. It could be used to help with tracking in 3D space if you had a camera or something like that. So this is a fairly meaningful pattern to most humans. Okay, well, here is just some random noise I generated in an image editor. It has no particular meaning. It's literally just randomness. So I made both of these pictures and saved them both as JPEG files to my hard drive. Well, the checkerboard pattern took up 22 kilobytes. The meaningless noise with no quote information took up 2,340 kilobytes. They are both the same size image. They are both 1,920 pixels by 1,080 pixels. That's a 1080 image for like a 1080 monitor or TV screen. Why is it that it's so much more difficult for my computer to store all the noise? Well, it's because the way that computers can store JPEG images is through compression, which means that the more information is in a picture, the harder it is to effectively compress. A checkerboard pattern of only white and black is actually fairly easy to compress. A bunch of absolute randomness essentially is uncompressible, so the absolute randomness has more information. So yes, if you were to shove a whole bunch of new base pairs into a genome, the information content would go up. And it's entirely possible, and has happened in the past, that we've observed organisms taking what was essentially just a bunch of noise in their genome and actually have it start expressing actual protein synthesis. This is why I've actually had creationists refuse to debate me on the topic of can information in the genome increase through mutations. They like to pretend that it can't, but it so obviously can that they're not even willing to debate it live. And if you're watching this and you're a creationist and you would like to debate that, let me know.
So when looking at us, we have, something in the neighborhood of 20 to 25,000 genes that code for somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million proteins.
Last time I checked, you can't have more proteins coded for by genes than you have genes, because genes code for proteins.
However the worm turned into fish, it had to gain the genes to make fish parts that fish do have that worms don't.
So apparently you think that there's a gene for a gill, and a gene for a tail, and a gene for a fin, and a gene for an eye. But that's stupid. That's not how genetics work. See, in embryonic development, the cells start out as essentially undifferentiated. Then regulatory genes will turn on and off, causing them to do things like divide, differentiate, fold, or die. And it's the various patterns of these things, which are all regulated by multiple genes, that actually cause this. But the thing is that regulatory genes exist in all organisms, including worms. It's primarily variation in the pattern of the signals sent by these genes that determine what the final structures of these organisms are going to be. It's not like you need to add a gene and oops, there's the fin gene. Now this fish has fins. That's not even close to how it works, and the fact that you seem to think that just means that you aren't even prepared in the remotest sense to talk about genetics.
Another thing this does not mean is that genetic information here is not just any new variation of nucleotides. It's not new arrangements or anything. People were like, well, mutations are all examples of new information. No, mutations are the corruption of information. Information results in something.
Nope, no it doesn't. Information can result in absolutely nothing. Just look at those files from previously that I have on my hard drive. They're resulting in nothing other than this video. They could sit there for 1,000 years. They would still have information in them, but it wouldn't do a damn thing.
The whole point of information in DNA is that a lot of it, actually not a lot of it, the majority of it is going to be operating system. It's going to be software that runs the cells. But the parts that we've studied the most are the parts that make proteins. So you've got genes that code for particular proteins, which are the physical structures that make up the parts of the cell, and the different cells make up the different organs and organelles in whatever plant or animal we're talking about. So information that doesn't or can't code for a functional part of that plant or animal is not information, it's degraded information. It's like if you spell something wrong or you take a book.
Well, it is new information. Simply because just to write it down, you would have to do something new that you wouldn't have had to do before that information came into that state. And further, functional proteins can and do observably come about from such information.
There are things in your cell. There are things in all cells that spell check. There are little tiny robots that run up and down the DNA correcting spelling mistakes. Why? Because mutations are harmful.
No, most of them actually do nothing at all. A good portion of the rest are harmful, and some of them are beneficial.
And so you have, built into every living cell, tiny robots that do spell check and correct those mistakes to make sure that as few as possible are kept and as few as possible are passed on to the next generation. And what happens is your cells divide or something like that, and something gets, your DNA gets copied and something gets spelled wrong. So the little robot runs in, finds the spelling error, and fixes it. And an evolutionist, but he has said that spelling error, where the mutation occurs, where something gets spelled wrong, it gets copied wrong, that's new information because that's something it didn't say before.
And he's right. It is new information based on, the actual definition of information in science. But you don't really have a counter for that, do you?
So every step up the evolutionary tree, every time a branch divides into two different kinds of plant or animal, you have to add new genetic information, new genes for structures, functions, and behaviors that did not previously exist. But let me clarify a couple of things. This can happen by mutation of existing genes, but not of genes that are necessary for survival. If you take a worm and you take the genes that it needs to survive and you mutate them, you no longer have the function that gene coded for, that it needs to survive, and that kills your worm.
Well, I guess it's a good thing that whole gene duplication is a thing, which means that an organism can end up with more than one copy of a vital gene, one of which can then later mutate. So, I'm not sure what the problem is.
Here's the thing that a lot of people sort of just aren't aware of, they don't think about, is that this is not just a change in physical structure, but it has to be the associated behavior, hardware and software. And I will here say that I think the software problem is infinitely more complex and much harder for evolution. In fact,
I don't see why. A lot of animal behaviors are actually hard-coded in the genes as instincts. And just like physical features only change very slowly, so do instincts. And any given small change in structure doesn't really require an immediate change in behavior, and then later on, a change in behavior which slightly better adapts the animal to use new structures can be selected for. Well, there's about 20 minutes left of this video, but I just watched all of it, and guess what? He doesn't actually give any new arguments. It's really, really boring to watch, so I'm not going to have you watch it, unless you really want to, in which case, link is in the description. Well, I guess that's all for this video. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you're always notified when there's more Dapper Dino content. If you really, really like this, why don't you head over to my Patreon and you can join the team that's helping me make these videos. There are several tiers, each of which has increasing rewards. Also, I now have an Amazon wishlist if you want to make a one-time donation. There is a price range all the way down from about $10 all the way up to over $200. Most of that stuff is going to help me make better videos. Some of it is sort of just for fun, but really most of it's to help with videos. Thank you for watching. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.
So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide? Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on